I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The briefing stopped before anyone in the room could finish the sentence. Catherine had looked across the table, seen Camilla at the center of the discussion, and something in her expression changed so sharply that the officials nearest her fell silent. One moment, papers were moving and quiet voices were filling the room. The next, Catherine raised her hand and brought everything to a halt. No warning, no explanation, just one decision that left every person present wondering what she had seen. For several seconds, nobody moved. Charles looked toward Catherine as though waiting for an explanation. William watched her carefully, knowing that she rarely disrupted a formal discussion without a reason. Camilla remained composed, but the atmosphere around her had changed. According to the kind of palace speculation that has surrounded royal relationships for years, Catherine's objection was not simply about seeing Camilla in the room. Something about the way the briefing had been arranged appeared to trouble her, and the silence that followed suggested the issue was more sensitive than anyone had expected. The subject of the briefing was already important. It concerned the monarchy's public image, the way senior royals would present themselves, and the delicate balance between family relationships and official responsibilities. That was precisely why Catherine's reaction carried weight. If the discussion had been an ordinary family matter, stopping it would have made little sense. But this was different. This was supposed to be a controlled conversation about the institution itself, and Catherine had apparently decided that the conversation could not continue until one question was answered. What had Camilla been brought into the discussion to do? Hi viewers, if Catherine was right to stop the briefing when she believed something was being handled behind closed doors, would you have done the same in her position? Leave a simple yes or no in the comments. And if you believe questions should be asked when royal decisions appear unclear, subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who follows the royal family. Staying silent allows unanswered questions to disappear. A comment takes only a second, but it shows that viewers are paying attention. That question hung over the room. Catherine did not immediately confront Camilla. She did something more unsettling. She asked for the briefing material to be checked before anyone continued. The request was calm, almost restrained, but it changed the temperature instantly. If Catherine had wanted a personal confrontation, she could have made one. Instead, she appeared to be questioning the process behind the meeting. The room remained tense. Camilla had every reason to understand why Catherine's interruption mattered. Public discussion surrounding the monarchy has examined the complicated relationship between personal loyalty and official duty. Catherine represents a newer generation of the institution, one that has spent years being watched for every expression, every gesture, and every apparent disagreement. Camilla occupies a different position. Her role is rooted in a relationship with the king and in a long public journey that has repeatedly placed her under intense scrutiny. If Catherine challenged Camilla directly, the story could instantly become another royal family dispute. Headlines would reduce it to rivalry, commentators would choose sides, the deeper issue would disappear beneath arguments about personalities. Catherine seemed to understand that danger. Her response, according to the speculation surrounding the confrontation, was therefore more calculated than emotional. She did not accuse Camilla of wrongdoing. She did not raise her voice. She did not walk out. She simply refused to let the briefing continue until the reason for Camilla's involvement was made clear. Charles now faced a difficult position. A king can settle a family disagreement privately. A formal briefing is different. Once official business is involved, every decision carries the weight of precedent. If one senior royal can enter a discussion because of personal connections, influence, or an arrangement that others were not aware of, questions naturally follow. Who approved it? Why was it necessary? Who else knew? And most importantly, would the same rule apply to everyone? William appeared to understand that immediately. His attention moved between his father, Catherine, and Camilla. He did not need to speak for the tension to become visible. He knew that whatever had happened in that room could not simply be brushed aside as another family disagreement. Catherine finally looked toward the briefing papers again, and that was the moment the confrontation began to look different. The speculation was no longer about whether Catherine disliked Camilla's presence. It was about whether Catherine had noticed a decision that had already been made without her knowledge. If that was true, then stopping the briefing was not an impulsive reaction. It was a demand to understand how the meeting had been constructed in the first place. Camilla remained quiet. That silence mattered, because she appeared to be waiting for Catherine to explain exactly what had caused the interruption, while Catherine seemed determined to make the room answer for itself. Who had decided that Camilla needed to be part of this conversation? Nobody answered immediately, and that hesitation was enough to deepen the suspicion. In royal life, silence can sometimes say more than an argument. A pause can suggest uncertainty. A glance can reveal that several people know more than they are prepared to say. In this case, according to the speculation surrounding the scenario, Catherine seemed to notice those reactions one by one. And then she made the move that would turn a tense disagreement into something much larger. Catherine asked for the original briefing arrangement, not the version being discussed in the room. That distinction changed everything. Because if the first version did not include Camilla in the same role, then someone had changed the plan before Catherine arrived, and if someone had changed it, the next question was unavoidable. Catherine had stopped the briefing, but she had not yet revealed what she intended to do next. That was the detail that left the room waiting in silence, because the next decision would determine whether this was simply another uncomfortable royal disagreement or the beginning of a confrontation over who gets to shape the monarchy's future. The original briefing arrangement was brought into the room, and for the first time, Catherine's expression appeared to soften. Not because she was satisfied, but because the document seemed to confirm what she had suspected. The discussion had been prepared before everyone arrived, yet the version in front of them appeared to give Camilla a role that had not been obvious from the original purpose of the meeting. Charles leaned forward and asked for the earlier version to be placed beside it. Nobody rushed to answer. Papers were gathered. An aide quietly checked the records. Catherine remained standing, her attention fixed on the documents rather than on Camilla. She was not looking for an argument. She appeared to be looking for the moment when the arrangement had changed. Camilla finally broke the silence. She wanted to know whether Catherine believed she had personally requested the change. The question carried an edge, but Catherine did not answer it immediately. She understood what would happen if she did. The entire briefing could become a dispute between two women, and the original issue would disappear beneath years of speculation about their relationship. Instead, Catherine asked another question. Who had decided that Camilla should be involved in this particular discussion? Again, the room went quiet. That question shifted the pressure away from Camilla and toward the people who had organized the meeting. It also created a problem for Charles. If Camilla had been invited because the subject genuinely concerned her responsibilities, then there should have been a clear reason. If she had been included through an informal decision, then the palace needed to explain why. Inside an institution built around protocol, small distinctions can become enormous. A private family conversation is one thing. A formal briefing about the monarchy's public direction is another. Once those worlds overlap, people begin asking who is speaking as family and who is speaking for the institution. That appeared to be Catherine's concern. Catherine knew that challenging Camilla could be interpreted as challenging the queen consort herself. Camilla's position was different. Any suggestion that she had overstepped could carry an uncomfortable implication. Charles knew that either interpretation could damage the public image the briefing was supposed to protect. William watched the exchange carefully. He had not interrupted Catherine, and he had not rushed to defend Camilla. That restraint suggested he understood the danger. The documents were finally placed on the table. There was a difference. It was not dramatic. There was no shocking accusation written across the page. The difference appeared in the way responsibilities had been described. Camilla's involvement had been given more weight than Catherine expected. That was enough. Catherine asked whether the wording had been approved by everyone who was expected to participate. The aide hesitated. Charles noticed the hesitation. So did William. Camilla's face changed. For the first time, she seemed less defensive and more curious. If the arrangement had been made without her knowledge, then she too had been placed inside a situation she had not created. That possibility complicated everything. Catherine could no longer simply challenge Camilla. She now had to determine whether Camilla had even known what had been arranged. The answer mattered. If Camilla had knowingly pushed herself into the briefing, Catherine's reaction would look different. But if she had accepted an invitation believing it was proper, then the real problem would sit elsewhere. Catherine asked directly whether Camilla had requested the expanded role. Camilla answered that she had not. The room exhaled again. Charles looked down at the papers. Nobody celebrated the answer. The atmosphere became heavier because the simplest explanation had disappeared. If Camilla had not requested the change, who had? That question began circulating through the room without anyone saying it aloud. Catherine finally sat down. That was the first sign the confrontation was changing. She was no longer trying to stop Camilla from speaking. She was trying to understand what had happened before the briefing. Then came another detail. The original purpose had not changed. The participants had. That raised a deeper concern. Why had the people involved changed? Who believed Camilla's presence was necessary? Why had Catherine not been given a clear explanation? Charles asked for the staff member who had prepared the final briefing. An aide stepped forward. The explanation was cautious. The change had been made because the subject touched on the Queen Consort's public responsibilities. On the surface, that sounded reasonable. Catherine was not satisfied. She asked whether the same standard would apply if the situation were reversed. That question landed harder than anything she had said before. Would another senior royal's private responsibilities automatically justify changing the membership of an official briefing? Nobody answered immediately. The issue had moved beyond Camilla. It was about precedent. If one informal adjustment could alter who sat inside a sensitive briefing, the next might seem just as harmless. Eventually, nobody would remember where the original boundary had been. That was the danger Catherine appeared to be pointing toward. Not Camilla, not herself, the system. But one piece was still missing. Catherine had asked for the original arrangement, and she had established that Camilla had not personally demanded the change. Yet she still had not explained why she had reacted so quickly when she first saw Camilla. The answer was still inside the paperwork. Catherine reached for one particular page. She read it once. Then again, her eyes stopped on a single line. William noticed. Charles noticed too. Camilla watched Catherine's face carefully. Whatever Catherine found seemed to explain why she recognized the problem. She placed the page back on the table, then she asked for the person who had approved that wording to come into the room, and suddenly, the briefing was no longer about why Camilla was there, it was about who had put her there. The person Catherine had asked for did not enter immediately. That delay lasted only a few seconds, but inside a room already charged with suspicion, even a few seconds felt deliberate. Charles looked toward the nearest aide. William remained silent. Camilla kept her eyes on Catherine. Then the door opened. A senior palace official stepped inside carrying a folder. Catherine did not greet the official with anger. She simply pointed toward the empty chair opposite her and asked the official to sit down. That calmness made the moment more uncomfortable. Everyone had expected a confrontation. Instead, Catherine appeared to be conducting something closer to an examination. The official explained that the revised briefing had been prepared after discussions about the monarchy's public presentation. Camilla's responsibilities had been considered relevant to the subject, and her inclusion had been treated as practical. Practical? Catherine repeated the word quietly. Then she asked what practical meant. No one answered immediately. She asked whether practical meant necessary, whether it meant requested, whether it meant formally approved, or whether it simply meant somebody inside the palace believed it would make the meeting easier. The distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. Camilla listened without interrupting. She could now see that Catherine was not trying to remove her from the room simply because she was Camilla. Catherine was questioning the chain of decisions that had placed her there. That did not make the situation comfortable. Camilla still had to sit through questions that could easily be interpreted as criticism of her position. Every answer seemed capable of becoming another headline. Every pause could be transformed into evidence of a feud. Charles understood that danger. He asked Catherine whether she believed the briefing should continue if the questions were answered. Catherine looked at him. She said it could continue once the original purpose of the meeting was restored. That sentence changed the atmosphere. She had not demanded that Camilla leave. She had demanded that the rules of the meeting become clear. William finally spoke. He asked whether the revised document had been circulated to every participant before the briefing began. The official hesitated. It had not. That answer was small, but it carried enormous weight. Catherine looked toward Camilla. Camilla appeared surprised. If the document had not been circulated, then Camilla could not reasonably have been expected to know exactly how her role had been described. The same applied to Catherine. She had entered the room without knowing that the structure of the discussion had changed. Charles leaned back. For the first time, the problem seemed less like a disagreement between two women and more like a failure of communication inside the institution. But Catherine was not finished. She asked for the earlier draft again. The official placed it on the table. Catherine compared the two versions. One line had changed. It was not a dramatic alteration. It did not contain an extraordinary instruction. It simply described Camilla as a participant whose perspective would be considered during the discussion. The wording sounded harmless. Catherine knew that harmless wording could still have consequences. She asked who had suggested the change. The official gave a name. The name was not Camilla's. That revelation created another silence. Camilla looked toward Charles. Charles looked toward the official. William's attention returned to Catherine. The person responsible had not been acting on a direct request from Camilla. That meant the story had changed again. Catherine had stopped the briefing after seeing Camilla, but the decision that concerned her appeared to have been made somewhere else. The obvious target had disappeared. Now there was a process to examine. Catherine asked why the change had been made without consulting everyone involved. The official explained that it had been considered a routine adjustment. The subject touched on public duties associated with the Queen Consort, and someone had believed her perspective should therefore be included. Catherine listened. Then she asked one question. If that reasoning was sufficient for Camilla, would the same reasoning apply to every senior royal? The official could not give a simple answer. That was the moment William understood where Catherine was going. She was not asking whether Camilla deserved to speak. She was asking whether personal position could quietly become automatic influence. There was a difference. A senior royal could have relevant knowledge without every relevant discussion becoming a personal entitlement. The monarchy depended on distinctions like that, especially when family relationships and official responsibilities existed inside the same institution. Camilla finally spoke. She said she had never expected to control the briefing. She had believed she had been invited because her responsibilities were relevant. If the arrangement had been inappropriate, she wanted to know that too. Her voice carried frustration, but there was something else underneath it, hurt. She had entered the room believing she belonged there. Now she was being forced to question whether the invitation itself had created a problem. Catherine looked at her for several seconds. Then she said that was exactly why the matter needed to be clarified, because if Camilla had been invited under an unclear arrangement, she should not be blamed for accepting it. The statement surprised everyone, especially Camilla. Catherine had been the person who stopped the meeting, yet she was now making sure Camilla was not treated as the culprit. Charles lowered his eyes toward the papers. The tension had shifted again. Catherine then asked for something else. She wanted to know whether similar changes had been made for other senior royals. The question produced a different kind of silence. This was no longer about one briefing. If similar adjustments had happened before, then the palace could not simply treat this as an isolated misunderstanding. It would suggest a wider habit of informal decisions, gradually becoming accepted practice. William immediately understood the significance. A precedent does not need to begin with a dramatic decision. Sometimes it begins with one small exception, then another, then another. Eventually, people stop asking whether the exception is appropriate because everyone has become accustomed to it. Catherine's concern appeared to be precisely that. The official admitted that there had been other occasions when briefing arrangements had been adjusted to accommodate the responsibilities of individual senior royals. No one spoke. Camilla's expression tightened. Charles asked whether those adjustments had followed a consistent rule. The answer was unclear. That was worse than a simple yes or no, because an unclear rule means different people can interpret the same situation differently. Catherine closed the folder. For a moment, everyone believed she was finished. She was not. She turned toward Charles and said the briefing should not continue in its current form. Charles asked what she proposed instead. Catherine's answer was simple. She wanted the discussion separated into two parts. The first would concern official royal responsibilities. The second would concern family perspectives. No one would be excluded because of personal relationships, but no one would receive an automatic role because of them either. The proposal was measured. It was also dangerous, because accepting it meant acknowledging that the original briefing had blurred a boundary. Charles knew it. William knew it. Camilla knew it. And Catherine knew that once the boundary was acknowledged, the palace would have to decide whether to restore the old arrangement or change it entirely. Charles asked Catherine why she had reacted so strongly when she first saw Camilla. Catherine paused. For the first time since the meeting began, she appeared genuinely emotional. She explained that it was not Camilla's presence that had shocked her. It was the realization that the briefing had changed without her knowing. She had seen the arrangement and understood immediately that something had happened before anyone entered the room. That was why she stopped everything. Not to embarrass Camilla, not to challenge the queen consort, to stop a decision from becoming normal before anyone had questioned it. The room fell quiet again, but this silence was different. There was no accusation in it. There was recognition. Catherine had found the real issue. And then the official placed one final page on the table. It contained the record of the original change. At the bottom was a note explaining why it had been made. Catherine read it. Her expression changed. William noticed first. Charles noticed second. Camilla was watching both of them. Because the note appeared to suggest that the decision had been made for a reason none of them had discussed. Catherine slowly placed the page on the table. She did not explain what she had seen. She only looked toward Charles, and in that moment, the entire room understood that the briefing had stopped for a reason far more complicated than Camilla's presence. The question was no longer who had invited Camilla. The question was why someone had believed her involvement was necessary in the first place. And Catherine had just found the answer. Catherine kept her eyes on the final page. The note was brief, almost forgettable. It explained that Camilla's involvement had been considered necessary because the subject of the briefing touched directly on the Queen Consort's public responsibilities and the future presentation of the monarchy. On its own, that explanation sounded reasonable, but Catherine had already noticed something else. The wording did not say Camilla had requested the change. It did not say Charles had personally ordered it. It did not even say that every senior participant had agreed. It simply stated that her involvement had been considered appropriate. That phrase stopped Catherine. Appropriate by whom? She asked the question quietly. The official looked down at the page. Charles waited. William said nothing. Camilla's expression hardened because the answer now seemed to matter as much to her as it did to Catherine. The official explained that the adjustment had been made after an internal discussion about the briefing's objectives. Someone had believed that Camilla's experience and public role would make the conversation more useful. Catherine listened. Then she asked whether that person had the authority to make the change. The answer was uncertain. That uncertainty was the real revelation. The problem was not necessarily that someone had acted maliciously. The problem was that nobody seemed completely certain where the authority began or ended, and that was precisely the kind of ambiguity Catherine appeared to fear. A royal institution can survive disagreement. It can survive criticism. It can even survive an uncomfortable family argument. What becomes dangerous is a decision nobody can clearly own. Charles reached for the document. He read the note himself. His expression remained controlled, but the room could feel the change. He asked the official whether the original briefing had been intended to include Camilla from the beginning. The answer was no. That was the moment the entire situation shifted. Camilla had not been part of the first arrangement. Someone had added her later, and nobody in the room could produce a clear explanation showing that the change had been formally approved by everyone who needed to know. Catherine finally looked directly at Camilla. There was no triumph in her expression. There was almost sympathy, because Catherine now understood something that had not been obvious when she first walked into the room. Camilla may have been placed in the middle of a controversy she had never intended to create. That did not erase the concern. It changed who deserved the blame. Charles asked for the official responsible for making the alteration to remain available for further questions. The official nodded. Catherine then did something that surprised everyone. She asked Camilla to stay. That was not what anyone expected. If Catherine wanted to push Camilla away, this would have been the moment. Instead, she wanted her there. The reason became clear when Catherine explained that removing Camilla would only make the situation look like a personal dispute. She did not want that. She wanted the decision examined while the person most affected by it was still present. Camilla looked at her for a long moment. The tension between them had not disappeared, but it had changed. Camilla asked whether Catherine believed she had done something wrong. Catherine answered carefully. She said the issue was not what Camilla had intended. The issue was what had been arranged around her. That distinction carried enormous weight. Camilla had spent years living under public scrutiny. Every disagreement involving her could be interpreted through old arguments, old headlines, and old assumptions. Catherine knew that. If she accused Camilla personally, the story would become another chapter in a familiar royal rivalry. Catherine appeared determined not to give it that shape. She returned to the document. Then she pointed to the final sentence. The wording suggested that Camilla's participation would help ensure a unified public message. Catherine asked who had decided that a unified message required her presence. No answer came. Charles looked toward the official. The official admitted that the phrase had been intended to avoid conflicting positions. That answer caused another problem. Avoiding conflicting positions is not the same thing as creating a genuine agreement. Catherine appeared to recognize the distinction immediately. If the palace wanted a unified public message, then the solution could not be to quietly place selected people inside the room and hope everyone followed the same line. The solution had to be agreement before the briefing. William finally entered the discussion. He said that if the institution wanted consistency, the process had to be consistent too. That statement brought the central issue into focus. This was no longer about Catherine and Camilla. It was about whether the monarchy could maintain a clear separation between private relationships, personal experience, and formal decision-making. Charles appeared to understand the seriousness of it. He asked Catherine what she wanted done. For the first time, she had the opportunity to turn her objection into a demand. Everyone waited. Catherine did not ask for Camilla to be removed permanently. She did not ask for the official to be dismissed. She did not ask Charles to choose between his wife and his daughter-in-law. Instead, she proposed that the briefing be suspended completely and rebuilt under a clear set of rules. Every participant would know why they were there. Every change would be recorded. No senior royal would receive an automatic place in a sensitive discussion simply because the subject touched on their family or public role, and any disagreement about participation would be settled before the meeting began. The proposal sounded simple, its implications were not, because it would prevent Catherine herself from receiving special treatment under the same circumstances. It would apply to Camilla, it would apply to William, it would apply to Catherine, and eventually it would apply to the next generation. That was when Camilla understood what Catherine was really doing. She was not building a case against her. She was trying to remove the possibility of another case like this happening again. Camilla asked whether Catherine understood what such a change would mean for the Queen Consort's responsibilities. Catherine said that responsibilities could remain. What needed to change was the assumption that responsibility automatically meant participation in every related discussion. Camilla sat back. For several seconds, she said nothing. The room waited for another disagreement. Instead, she acknowledged that the distinction made sense. That single response weakened the idea that the women were fighting over power. They were confronting two different fears. Catherine feared an unclear precedent. Camilla feared that any challenge to the arrangement would be interpreted as another rejection of her place within the family. Both fears could exist at the same time. Charles now had a decision to make. He could end the matter quietly. He could tell everyone that the arrangement had been misunderstood and move on, or he could acknowledge that the process itself needed to change. The second option carried a greater risk. It meant admitting that something had gone wrong inside the machinery of the briefing, but it also offered something more valuable, a way forward that did not require anyone to become the villain. Charles chose the second path. He ordered the briefing paused until the participation rules were reviewed. The official was instructed to provide the full sequence of changes that had led to Camilla's inclusion. Catherine remained silent. She had stopped the meeting. Now the consequences were moving beyond her control. Camilla looked toward her once more. There was still tension between them. But there was also an understanding. Catherine had not wanted Camilla silenced. She had wanted the room to stop pretending that everything was already settled. And then the official opened the final section of the record. There was another entry. It showed that the change had not been made once. The wording had been adjusted again shortly before the briefing. Catherine stared at the date. William leaned closer. Charles asked why there had been a second alteration. Nobody answered, because the second change appeared to give Camilla an even greater role than the first. And suddenly, Catherine's interruption made perfect sense. She had not merely noticed Camilla, she had noticed that the rules surrounding Camilla had changed more than once. The briefing had not simply been rearranged. It had evolved quietly before anyone in that room had publicly questioned it. Catherine closed the folder. Then she looked at Charles and made the decision that nobody had expected. She said the meeting should not resume until every change had been explained. The room fell silent. This time, even Camilla did not object, because whatever had happened next was no longer about one woman's position. It was about who had been shaping the monarchy's most sensitive conversations without everyone realizing it. The room remained silent after Catherine's final decision. The briefing would not resume until every alteration had been explained. For a moment, nobody appeared willing to move. Charles looked across the table at the documents that had turned an ordinary royal discussion into a question about authority. William remained beside Catherine, watching the officials prepare the records. Camilla sat quietly, no longer appearing defensive. Then Catherine made the move nobody had expected. She asked for the original briefing to be canceled entirely. Not postponed, not delayed for an hour, canceled. The decision immediately changed the meaning of everything that had happened before it. Catherine was not trying to force the room to accept her preferred version of events. She was refusing to allow a disputed arrangement to become official simply because the meeting had already begun. Charles understood the logic. If the briefing continued, while the questions remained unresolved, whatever had happened beforehand could later be treated as accepted practice. The safest way to prevent that was to stop it completely and begin again under clearer terms. Camilla looked toward Catherine. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Camilla asked whether Catherine wanted her removed from future discussions concerning the monarchy's public image. Catherine shook her head. That was the moment the room seemed to understand her real position. She did not want Camilla excluded. She wanted the same standard applied to everyone. That distinction mattered, because if Catherine had demanded that Camilla be pushed aside, the confrontation would have become personal. It would have looked like one royal using institutional authority against another. Instead, Catherine proposed something far more difficult, a rule that would apply to herself as well. Sensitive royal briefings would have clearly defined participants. Any addition would require an explanation. Any change would be recorded. Private family relationships would not automatically determine official participation. The proposal left no obvious winner. Catherine could not claim victory because the same restrictions would apply to her. Camilla could not claim defeat because her role would remain intact when her responsibilities genuinely required it. Charles could protect the institution without publicly condemning his wife. William could support Catherine without turning the disagreement into a family campaign. That was why the room had become so quiet. The argument had stopped being about personalities. It had become about rules. And that was precisely what Catherine appeared to have wanted from the beginning. The official responsible for the briefing changes was asked to explain why the second alteration had been made shortly before the meeting. The explanation remained procedural rather than sinister. The purpose had been to make the briefing more coordinated and to ensure that relevant senior royal perspectives were represented. But the problem was now obvious. Intent did not remove consequence. Someone could believe they were making a briefing more efficient while quietly changing who had influence inside it. That was the hidden weakness Catherine had exposed, not necessarily conspiracy, not necessarily betrayal, something much more ordinary and therefore potentially more dangerous, a system in which small decisions could become accepted simply because nobody stopped to question them. Charles ordered the entire briefing process reviewed. The revised meeting would have a new structure. Camilla would participate only where her official responsibilities were directly relevant. Catherine would be treated under the same principle. William would be treated under the same principle. No one would receive an automatic place simply because of family connection. That decision gave the confrontation its final shape. Catherine had stopped the briefing after spotting Camilla, but her next move had not been to attack Camilla. It had been to remove the uncertainty surrounding everyone. Camilla eventually spoke. She said she had never wanted her presence to create a dispute. She had believed the invitation was legitimate. Catherine accepted that explanation. There was no dramatic embrace, no sudden declaration that years of tension had disappeared. The moment was quieter than that. Camilla understood that Catherine's objection had not been an accusation of bad faith. Catherine understood that Camilla had not necessarily known how the briefing had been altered. The disagreement had exposed something neither woman had created alone. That realization carried its own emotional weight. For Charles, the episode presented an uncomfortable lesson. Protecting the people closest to him could not mean protecting every arrangement made in their name. If something could not be explained clearly, it had to be questioned. William appeared to reach the same conclusion from another direction. He understood that the monarchy would eventually belong to another generation. Any informal practice accepted today could become an expectation tomorrow. That was why Catherine's decision mattered beyond the meeting. She had not simply stopped a conversation, she had challenged the possibility of a precedent being created without anyone consciously choosing it, and that was the deeper reason the moment resonated so strongly in royal commentary. The public rarely sees the internal mechanics of royal decision-making. Viewers see photographs, speeches, ceremonies, official visits, and carefully prepared statements. Behind those visible moments are countless decisions. Who attends? Who speaks? Who receives information? Who is consulted? Who is not? Most of those decisions never become stories, but occasionally one decision becomes impossible to ignore. This was the kind of situation that could turn a routine briefing into a symbol. The palace could allow the controversy to become another story about Catherine and Camilla, or it could use the moment to clarify the rules. The decision was to clarify them. The briefing was eventually rebuilt. The participants were defined more carefully. The disputed changes were no longer treated as automatic, and the issue that had begun with Catherine's sudden interruption ended with something much less dramatic than the confrontation everyone had expected. A boundary, a clearer one, the kind of boundary that had been missing from the beginning, and yet there was one final detail that changed the emotional meaning of Catherine's decision. She had been given the opportunity to use the moment against Camilla. She did not. She could have allowed the room to believe that Camilla herself was responsible. She did not. She could have turned the incident into a public victory. Instead, she redirected attention toward the process. That was the calculated move, the one that silenced everyone. Because once Catherine made the issue about a rule that had to apply equally to every senior royal, nobody could easily accuse her of protecting her own position while attacking someone else's. She had placed herself under the same standard, and that made the argument much harder to dismiss. The controversy surrounding the episode remains exactly that, controversy and speculation, rather than something that can simply be treated as established palace fact. But as a royal commentary narrative, its most compelling question is not whether Catherine and Camilla were enemies. It is what happens when family loyalty enters a room where institutional rules are supposed to come first. That is where the real tension lies. Catherine saw something that made her stop. She refused to let the briefing continue without an explanation. She discovered that Camilla's involvement was more complicated than it first appeared. And when she finally had the opportunity to strike at the person sitting across from her, she chose another path. She changed the question. Not why is Camilla here, but who decided this, and would the same rule apply to everyone? That question was powerful because it could not be answered with emotion. It required accountability, and perhaps that was why the room became silent, not because Catherine had defeated Camilla, not because Camilla had been exposed, not because one royal had won a private battle. The silence came because everyone suddenly understood that the problem was bigger than either woman. A royal institution survives on trust. Trust depends on clarity. And when the boundary between family